So, welcome everybody to this evening of reflection and discussion. Attack on free speech in times of COVID. Uh, the Wire, Sabrang India, Delhi Union of Journalists, and Brihan Mumbai Union of Journalists. We are very, very happy to bring this inspiring panel of speakers today at this meet, an online meet, to commemorate a day when we lost Gauri and as a tribute to her memory. For Gauri Lankesh, journalism was both her métier and activism was her passion. To build a cohesive resistance was her mission, building bridges all the time, bridges between movements. Entering Kannada journalism, editing her weekly, penning her columns that brought her both acclaim and in the crosshairs of multiple defamation suits. First Lankesh Patrike and then Gauri Lankesh Patrike. A life that stood first and foremost against the politics of hate, violence, and majoritarianism. Grace and civility that was Gauri, and most of all, a courage and forthrightness that stood in stark contrast to violent cowardice and downright slander. Months before she was brutally assassinated in 2017, 8 stories critical of the central government were published by her. A week before her death, she wrote of the tragic Gorakhpur deaths in a hospital. Remember Dr. Kafil Khan's and his repeated incarcerations. To Kannada journalism, she brought the national, the international, and the local in a wonderful fusion, because for Gauri, the personal was the political. And hours before her assassination, around 8:10 p.m. on September 5th, 2017, 3 years ago, she posted a photograph of herself and her father on Facebook, P. Lankesh, who was himself a doyen of an intellectual writer and journalist, and who had founded Lankesh Patrike. Gauri wrote, an absentee father most times, but a wonderful teacher of life. My Abba, happy Teacher's Day. It was in 2000 that Gauri Lankesh took up the challenge and led the Patrike into something of a cult following in Karnataka. No wonder then that the response, the anger, and the resistance to her killing is alive even today. Today, we all hope that this resistance will burgeon and grow. Now more than ever, we need a rededication of the world, of the media, to the values that Gauri Lankesh stood for. In journalism, for the universal values of fair play, non-discrimination, and equality. So today's meeting is not just a tribute to her memory, but comes with a resolve, a collective resolve, to take her and our mission forward. Welcome all of you. It gives us great pleasure to first introduce Meena Kandaswamy, an Indian poet, fiction writer, translator, and activist. She has actively sought to combine her love for the written word with the struggle for social justice through poetry, through fiction, through translation, and essays for the last 15 years. Meena.
Thank you, Pista, for having me here, and Siddharth as well for organizing this event. I'm very sad and depressed actually to think about what happened to Gauri, but I'm here to talk about what's happening to the freedom of expression and to journalism under the pandemic, but largely the pandemic that's the Modi government. Before I start, I wanted to just highlight some of the goings on. Recently we know that just because a few of us tweeted and expressed what was our criticism of, publishing a book on the Delhi riots, we were told, we had a criminal complaint filed on us, largely because, we were seen as pressurizing a publishing company, Bloomsbury, into withdrawing what was a very controversial book, despite the timing in which it was coming. And I wanted to say that, on the one hand, the right wing, especially in India, is always getting off by portraying themselves constantly as the victims. So, even if somebody criticizes and says, you cannot give a platform to fascism, they try to take it and say, oh, look at us, we're victims, we don't have the freedom of speech. And I want to actually break down this idea that, what is actually happening to freedom of speech and how the right wing is, making people go silent. So in some of the worst cases, like it happened with Gauri Lankesh, they just shoot her dead. But I want to concentrate today, thanks to my Tamil journalist friends, Pierre Mohammed, who is here, and Hasif, as well, who are being targeted. I decided that I would make use of this opportunity and these 8-10 minutes that I have to speak about what's happening in Tamil Nadu and how Tamil journalists are being particularly targeted by the right wing. And there's many reasons why the right wing is trying to concentrate its efforts on Tamil Nadu. One of the reasons is that it's for obvious electoral reasons. It's one of the very few states that sends more than 40 parliamentarians, and therefore they would like to control it. But most of all, the ideological challenge to Hindutva and the idea of resisting Brahminical fascism is very, very strong in Tamil Nadu, where the BJP has not been able to make open and so-called electoral account, even if they have been able to make ideological inroads. So when I want to talk about what's happening to journalists, I would like to start with instances that go back up to 2014, for instance, when Sun TV's anchor Veerapandian, who appeared in an SDPI meeting, and all that he was saying in that meeting was that Muslims of Tamil Nadu, Muslims should be very aware of what awaits them under Narendra Modi's rule, and that it was going to be a very difficult period for them. For just making such a speech on a platform, they started attacking him, and they made the BJP in Tamil Nadu and the RSS affiliates made representations to the management of the Sun TV group, and tried to pressurize them and say that he's said anti-Hindu things, he's a Hindu hater. And slowly Veerapandian was not removed per se, but his powers were restricted, the amount of shows that he was doing was restricted, and feeling kind of cornered within his own office, he had to eventually leave the job. And what started in 2014 is really getting accelerated right now in Tamil Nadu. So you had issues like another journalist who was working with News 7, for instance, his name was Nelson Xavier, and I want to say all of the names and share all of their stories because it's far more important to talk about this, because sometimes India happens to mean only the cow belt, and people don't look at what's happening elsewhere. And the South is largely neglected from the national discourse. So I thought it's quite important to. So with Nelson Xavier, again, the fact that he was a product of Loyola College or a Christian institution was played up. And, so again, they started portraying him as an anti-Hindu. And this was again used, a lot of the campaign against him was done through social media, and eventually leading to a situation where he was removed of his editorial capabilities and allowed only to be an anchor. And this kind of coercive action that comes from the right wing has constantly targeted any journalists who also aspire to, even if they're remotely connected with any Periyarist organization. And we have to understand that in the social fabric of Tamil Nadu since the 1920s, the self-respect movement, Dravidian movement is large. So it's impossible to find a lot of people who are not influenced by Dravidian thought. So they have been going after anyone who's had, the slightest inclination or slightest identification with the Periyar movement to target them. So for instance, there's another journalist called Vikram from Galata.com, which is quite a popular portal. And they again, the Sangh Parivar and the RSS affiliates started digging up the fact that as a young student, he was part of the DK, the Dravida Kalagam student wing. And so they tried to, cancel his program, but also what they did was they started going after the sponsors for the shows that he was doing and the interviews that he was doing, and asked them to cancel sponsorship so that his show got off air. And of course, it's one thing to speak about the way they go after, male journalists, for instance, Karthikeyan of Pudhiya Thalamura. Even few days ago, H. Raja in a video clip openly said, oh, this person is anti-Hindu, so he should not be on television, and all because he had shared some information that appeared to show that, the question that he asked in a talk show is, if you say that menstruating women cannot enter temples, what becomes to goddesses when they are menstruating? Are you going to remove them out of temples? This was a popular poem that he had read somewhere. He happened to quote it on air. And so they are running this complete campaign saying that, this person should not be on air because he happens to be anti-Hindu. And this was also what led to the removal, they also have a lot of Limpian elements who make YouTube videos and try to launch attacks. So this was what happened with someone called Maria Das, who made a YouTube video alleging that a very popular news anchor who's also started as a journalist with Dinamani, Indian Express, Times of India, then moved into television, Gunasekaran, was targeted and, uh, kind of pushed out of being in News 18. And a similar thing also happened to Hasif, who was the chief of news bureau in News 18. So he had to, as being in an editorial position, take the hit and had to renounce his job. And also we have to understand that News 18 is owned by Network 18, which is very close to Ambani. So there's no way we can also look at what's happening in this, the BJP RSS and their corporate friends deciding what gets to become news and who gets to make news. And side by side, of course, as much as they are going on this very Hindutva agenda, they also have a very anti-women agenda. So we have been seeing, and the Network of Women in Media and others have talked about what's happening to journalist Kavin Malar, whom I really respect and adore a lot, and the way they've been, trying, like with any outspoken women, trying to portray her, trying to share her pictures, trying to dox her by releasing her phone numbers. They shared a picture of her and said the rate is 1,000 rupees. These are very, very, very demeaning things that await women journalists. And, this is also not something that's happening overnight. This is a systematic campaign of, right from 2013 or 14, and they have had to endure this for 6 or 7 years. And as much as all of this, Hindu, anti-Hindu politics is playing out, we also have a situation in Tamil Nadu where I particularly think that once you also happen to be a Tamil and a Muslim journalist, it becomes easy to also, try to fix you into the dreaded terrorism labels. So recently, you had one of these BJP chief trollers called Kalyan Raman, who suddenly started tweeting that Hasif, who was removed from News 18, and Pierre Mohammed, who runs his own independent portal Ipode, after being a senior journalist with the Deccan Chronicle for several years, they were portrayed as having connections to the ISIS. Now there's no there's no such proof of anything. Only the fact that they happen to be Muslim journalists is causing them to put such enormous allegations on them, but also in some ways make them expose them to violence, because people are not going to be very nice to people whom they assume are terrorists. So I think that we are living at least within the Tamil news landscape or journalist landscape, where journalists are either locking their accounts or afraid of being trolled, or the content and what they say is being extremely pressurized and monitored by BJP groups. And I think this is as much as it's a very pan-India phenomena, and we've had cases, I think Siddharth even had a case filed against him. Teesta has been hounded. I really think that is quite dangerous, because there are so many ways in which the right wing is silencing you, and one of the ways is, of course, filing cases on you, or involving all this troll propaganda. But the other thing is when they start going after and calling you a terrorist, or trying to pressure your own company into not letting you keep your job. And I just want to finish on this note that we have to look beyond the English speaking and the national mainstream or the cowbelt mainstream, and talk about what's happening elsewhere. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I hope that this conversation will continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Meena. It's really true that we need to look at the South as much as all the margins. And I think what we are going to do now is look at a part of India which is really possibly during and even before the lockdown has seen a complete clampdown of democratic freedoms, including attack on the media. Gohar Jilani, journalist and author of Kashmir, Rage and Region. Not only does he write for Germany's public broadcaster Deutsche Welle, but he's written many a time for The Wire and even for Sabrang India in early days. He's written for Al Jazeera and the BBC as well. And in a brazen attempt to stifle the truth coming out of Kashmir, the J&K police has even lodged a case against him and other journalists under the draconian Unlawful Activities Prevention Act in April this year. It's a tremendous courage, Gohar, that you've shown joining us today. Welcome.
Uh, First of all, thank you very much, Tista, and thank you very much, Siddharth. There is acknowledgement crisis all across the world, and I take this opportunity to thank you, for standing up and showing and summoning courage to report facts as they are, not only about Kashmir but also about, your own, states. So what I am going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about myself and my case because, in the case of Kashmir, what has happened is that journalists are storytellers, but they have themselves become the stories. So I want to talk about the larger problem that the journalists in Kashmir have been facing, not, for the last 30 years, but more particularly since 5th of August last year. So I just want to tell you that I have kind of tried to explain the entire story in three P's and three C's and three F's, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that. After silencing the politicians, that is the first P, of all ideological hues, and the people, and then the pulpit. So these were the three P's: the politicians, the pulpit, and the people. The authorities in Jammu and Kashmir decided now it's time to shoot the messenger. So they went after the media. So what happened with media was that the cases were filed against many journalists. More than 10 were summoned, questioned, and interrogated, and there are FIRs against 10 of them, and 3 were arrested. And out of those, 1 is still behind the bars. His name is Asif Sultan. Before that, Kamran Yusuf was taken into custody, and then Qazi Shibli also spent 9 months in detention. So what has happened with these arrests and summons and FIRs is first the psychological impact, and how the process in itself has been the punishment for journalists and writers and any opinion maker in Kashmir. And then another P, that is the media policy of 2020, which is actually not a law, but through this media policy, what they intend to do is that they've empowered and given unbridled powers to any bureaucrat or a clerk in the Directorate of Information and Public Relations, DIPR, where they will decide what is fake news, they will decide what is anti-national, seditious, and then they are empowered to initiate a legal proceeding against any journalist, any editor, any proprietor. So, to justify actions against journalists, that policy will come handy. And it is irony that till date, not even the Kashmir Editors Guild, not the Press Club of Kashmir, or other organizations, because the fear is so much. That's my second point. 3 F's. 3 F's is like, first is how they create fear, that you end up self-censoring yourself. And in the case of fear, what happens? There are 3 possibilities. One is that you choose to take a flight from the fear, you run away. And second is that you do not know how to react, how to respond. So that is the mode psychologists say that it is the freeze mode. You don't know how to respond. And third is that you choose to fight. And there are very few journalists left in Kashmir who have chosen chosen to fight. The rest have either fallen in line or out of fear, out of fear of losing jobs, or other reasons, maybe in some cases greed also. And they're taking some advertisement money to just shut all reportage. And second F is the FIRs, how people have been summoned and questioned at cyber police station, and it's a routine. I mean, since last August, if I take names, if I have the liberty to take names: Pirzada Ashik of the Hindu, Nasir Ganai of the Outlook, Harun Nabi. I included Fahad Shah of the Kashmir Wala, Qazi Shibli of Kashmiriyat, Indian Express, Basharat Masood, Irfan Hakim of the Economic Times, you name it. All leading journalists who have been reporting for international and other media organizations, credible media organizations, and with an experience of more than 10, 15 years and 20 years in journalism, all of them have been hounded and harassed. And there is so much of mental harassment, not only to journalists, but also to their extended families. So then, through their narrative pushers, they want to create a false narrative that everything is normal in Kashmir. And then I come to the last 3 C's, which is, what they did was, first was the, written censorship and the unwritten censorship. And what has unwritten censorship done is that it has caused self-censorship. People think 100 times before writing their story. and think, what this word could mean for me. It could mean a summon, it could mean interrogation, it could mean an FIR, it could even mean detention. So then is how they have another C is criminalizing journalism. They have criminalized opinions. They have criminalized all kinds of opinions, and then controlling the narrative and containing the Kashmir story by manufacturing consent and by distortion. By distortion, they want to create a political elite. They also want to create a false media narrative that everything is hunky dory in Kashmir, and they basically want to reduce journalists in Kashmir to PR wings and government's arm, that you have to propagate only one kind of view. So these were the 3 P's and 3 C's and 3 F's. But then, I just also want to talk about, there is the ancient Greeks held that courage was not a virtue in itself, but that it was a quality that made all virtues possible. So I'm going to talk also about the media policy. This media policy is very, very dangerous. And to all you guys who have chosen to stand up for truth, I want to say that this Kashmir is a laboratory for many experiments, but don't think that what has been done in Kashmir cannot be replicated elsewhere. They will come to you as well. There's this famous, Martin Niemöller's immortal words, which were like in a poetic form. First they came for the communists and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Sorry. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. I want to add, with due respect to Martin Niemöller, then they came for the Kashmiris and I did not speak out because I was not a Kashmiri. And then, when they came for me, there was no one left to speak out for me. So that is what I want to convey. And last but not the least, I want to talk about that there is another problem in Kashmir, that is the eviction. Many journalists have been evicted from the government quarters. To name a few, Nazir Masoodi of NDTV, he was asked, there was no written order, but they had to, they had to shift to their own houses. There was Fayaz Bukhari of Reuters. And even to those journalists who are living outside Kashmir, who are Kashmiris but are living outside Kashmir, their names were there, like Mirza Waheed, Basharat Peer, Parvez Bukhari, and they were on papers. They were asked. There was government directive from the Estates Department that they had to leave their quarters. So many, Ejaz Hussain of the AP, he also left that quarter. So that is another harassment to journalists who come from different parts of Kashmir and were living in estates departments, buildings to do their journalism. So I just don't want to take much of your time, but I want to end this talk with Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi's poem, which will take me 1 minute, and with that I will end my talk. That is, जिंदगी के जितने दरवाजे हैं मुझ पर बंद हैं, देखना हद नजर से आगे बढ़कर देखना भी जुर्म है, सोचना अपने अकीदों और यकीनों से निकलकर सोचना भी जुर्म है, आसमां दर आसमां असरार की परतें हटाकर झांकना भी जुर्म है, क्यों भी कहना जुर्म है, कैसे भी कहना जुर्म है, सांस लेने की आजादी तो मुयस्सर है मगर जिंदा रहने के लिए इंसान को कुछ और भी दरकार है, और इस कुछ और का भी तज़किरा भी जुर्म है। ए खुदामंदाने ऐवान अकायद, ए हुनरमंदाने आईन और सियासत, जिंदगी के नाम पर बस एक इनायत चाहिए, मुझको इन सारे जराइम की इजाजत चाहिए। There is no freedom of expression in Kashmir, and there is no freedom after expression. There is only freedom of expression is available to police and bureaucrats who are now de facto MLAs, de facto opinion makers, and de facto columnists. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving this opportunity to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Gawar Saab. As is said, that if we don't pay attention to what is happening in Kashmir and in the margins of our country, before we know it, it'll be at our own door, and we know it's at our own door as well. Friends, right from the start, a very dear friend and fellow traveler, Kavita Lankesh, sister of dear Gauri Lankesh, has been with us. She's going to be in and out of the meeting because of multiple commitments. But I just want to say on behalf of all 4 organizers that, Kavita, your courage in carrying on the battle and the light that Gauri lit for all of us has been amazing and inspiring. She also told me to correct my introduction and say it was her Facebook post on her father that was put up on that fateful day of 5th September, and Gauri shared it. This is in the best interest of sibling sharing and sibling rivalry. Our next speaker is Pradeep Fanjoban, who's a very senior journalist from Imphal, Manipur. And he's today the editor of FPSJ, the Review of Arts and Politics portal, which is a news portal which is based in Imphal, Manipur, run and owned by its team of media workers. He's a well-known name who writes for many independent newspapers and publications. Pradeep.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm happy to be speaking on this forum. And, we've heard so many other speakers, 2 other speakers who gave us quite a scary kind of profile of what's happening in their states. And I would say, although it's not as bad as it is in Kashmir, it's not too good here either. And here is a little different in the sense that the state is oppressive. But now what's happening is not just the oppressive quality of the state, but also the government after the BJP came to power. And this because it's a very insecure kind of government in a sense that they started off on the wrong foot. They were a minority in the elections in 2017. They had only 21. We have a 60-member house, and they had only 21, and the Congress had 28. So the Congress needed only 3 to be in the majority. But the governor did not allow this. I don't know for what reason, or maybe I know, but for unstated reasons, she allowed the BJP to form the government, and they had to clobber together many parties. And that had a price for the BJP. They had to actually buy them with ministerial berths, and they ended up actually giving away all their seats, and they were left to just 4. Because the anti-defection law actually puts a ceiling on the size of the cabinet. And in the case of small states like Manipur, most of the northeast states except Assam, it is 12, and 12 including the chief minister. So they had to give away 5 of these seats to others, and they had only the remaining left. So that itself was the cause of the insecurity in the beginning, that anybody defecting can actually tumble the government. And that insecurity actually makes people dangerous, and that's what's been happening. Any bit of criticism, you get arrested. And in terms of the number of people arrested, I think probably it'll match Kashmir, although the reason may be a little different. You make, and some of the arrests were actually very on frivolous grounds. Somebody, I'll just give you some example. One person on Facebook asked, and people are getting arrested for simple posts on Facebook. Somebody asked, how much did the chief minister contribute to the chief minister relief fund? And that was taken as offensive, and he was arrested. Of course, no charge could be framed against him, so he was released. But the intimidation happened, and so many other arrests like that. So, and there was another fellow who simply asked, he's an elderly fellow. So he simply made a statement saying that the chief minister shouldn't be wasting time this was during the COVID thing. He should concentrate on the COVID and should not be wasting resources and time on these kind of issues. And for that, he was also picked up by the police. And that kind of thing, there's a whole list of them. But the most atrocious was a fellow called Wangkhim Cha Wangthai. He actually made a statement again on the Facebook that against the BJP as well, that this is a party of cow urine addicts, some very profane language as well. And he was picked up on sedition charge, and the court ruled against that sedition thing. There was no sedition in that, so he was released. But immediately the next day he was arrested under the NSA. And as I was saying in the beginning, only a very insecure government can resort to that kind of thing, as if one statement on the Facebook can actually threaten the nation. That kind of thing was being resorted to. He was arrested and he was placed in jail. And ultimately, the High Court had to come in and say that no, this does not amount to any threat to the nation. He had to be released. So he was released that way. And there's been a number of people like that. For simple things like throwing eggs at the portrait of the chief minister and the prime minister, people arrested, and that man also had to be in jail for 2-3 months. That kind of thing, And the thing is, maybe they were not charged, and maybe they were not kept in jail for long. But that sense of fear, the sense of the state can actually come back to you for anything. That actually puts you on alert, and also makes you always apprehensive of whatever you say. So that kind of thing has been happening. And I would say, returning to the same argument, that there is a complete breakdown of the law here, and not in the sense that of a challenge to the state by unlawful organizations like the insurgents, but because those in power actually have assumed that impunity. You are so used to that impunity when this Armed Forces Special Powers Act, it is still active here, and that you cannot actually challenge power. That's the sense that people have, and this we thought was only in relation to the armed forces, but now it's becoming that way with regards to the government as well, that they can do anything. It started, as I said in the beginning, the formation of the government. They had only 21, and yet they formed the government. They actually affected the defection of one person from the Congress. He was made into a cabinet minister, and no defection of anti-defection law was applied there. For 3.5 years it was like that. Ultimately, the Supreme Court had to come in and then say, this is not allowed. Then he was disqualified on, I think, March 28th something. This was 3.5 years, almost 3.5 years after his defection, and after he was a minister, was made a minister. And then there were 7 others who also slowly started defecting to the Congress. I mean, to the BJP congressmen. They were also not disqualified, in spite of repeated applications. And what happened was the Rajya Sabha election came up. And before that election, some of them wanted to return to Congress. And those people who wanted to return to Congress were disqualified. And that was allowed. The law doesn't, it's like in Alice in Wonderland, that you don't know where the law is. Somebody says, the Queen says, off with his head, and then that's gone. That kind of thing is happening at the moment. And that has become actually really, really dangerous for everybody. And the safest way is for everybody to remain quiet. And this message was sent across quite strongly. And recently also there was a memorandum from the government invoking the Civil Services Act 1964, whereby no academics in the colleges, the college lecturers, are allowed to actually go to the press, write articles in the press, or participate in debates on the TV without permission from the government. That kind of thing has come about here. So actually, it's a complete silencing of the press, as well as anybody who is critical of the government, and that, of course, may be an attribute of the government or the party, but also because of that insecurity that was embedded in the formation of the government itself, that they think that anything is dangerous, any criticism is dangerous, and any criticism can actually shake up the government, and which almost happened also. In some ways it's true that some people, some of the partners were almost defected, and that almost brought down the government. So there's some bit of justification, but in the wrong way. But the burden of that security is on the people as well as the press. And this breakdown in the law of rule of law was seen again and again. Recently, again, there was a trust vote. Actually, it was a no confidence motion, but the government actually sabotaged the opposition by also asking for a confidence motion, and that confidence motion, as per rule, was the one which was admitted. But what happened was, during the voting, there was a voice vote, and somebody in the opposition actually wanted a division vote, but the speaker didn't allow it. Although the rule says that if somebody objects that voice vote, it has to be decided by a division vote. And in case the speaker is certain that the majority is the other side, that it is overwhelmingly different, then he's obliged to actually make the aye-sayers and the naysayers stand up in turn and do a head count. Even that he didn't do. He said the ayes were louder, so he just gave the thing that way. So and these things are being allowed, and these things are being actually normalized. People are now thinking that it's useless to complain, useless to actually put up these protests. And so I think voices on the social media, as well as of course the established media are a little more afraid, because they can face court cases. It's not just one person facing the chief minister or the speaker, but it's the entire establishment. So they are a little more afraid. I mean, that's always the case when you are an established body, that you are afraid of the law, you are afraid of being intimidated in other ways, unlike the individual. So we see now also there are a number of individuals, in spite of the repressive measures of the government, number of individuals actually coming out and hitting out at the government, but not the established media. Not too many of them established media. Some of them are doing, but not too many of them. So that's the kind of thing that has come about because of this, the character of this government. And now, as of now, it's as if the rule of law is non-existent in Manipur. Thank you.
I want to thank all panelists and speakers for being extremely meticulous about the time. And yeah, it's not. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
yes, we can.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm sorry about that. There seems to be some problem here. So I was just saying, it seems like we have to take one day at a time, but I think we also have to think of more collective ways of being able to get this information out in a more systematic way. We're doing all of us are doing our best at different levels, but I think maybe we need to rededicate ourselves to some of this more systematic and collective sharing. The next speaker we have is somebody from Jharkhand, Ranchi-based Jacinta Karkata, freelance journalist and a Hindi poet belonging to the Oraon Adivasi community of West Singhbhum. In her writings, Jacinta highlights the injustices committed on the Adivasi communities along with their struggles. Jacinta said that she would recite some of her poetry, speak both in Hindi and English, and we really look forward to listening to her. Jacinta. Jacinta? Jacinta, I can see you there. Yeah. Yeah.
Jacinta, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
शायद जसिंता का माइक म्यूटेड है.
हाँ, आपको शायद फोन करना पड़ेगा सोहेल.
हेलो.
या, we can hear you.
आवाज आ रही है?
हाँ जी, अभी आ रही है. जसिंता, अभी आ रही है.
आप सभी को जोहार. और मैं अपनी छोटी कविताओं से अपनी बात शुरू करूंगी. ये कुछ मेरी नई कविता है और इसका इंग्लिश मेरे पास नहीं है, तो मैं सिर्फ हिंदी में ही पढ़ रही हूँ. राष्ट्रवाद. जब मेरा पड़ोसी मेरे खून का प्यासा हो गया, जब मेरा पड़ोसी मेरे खून का प्यासा हो गया, मैं समझ गया राष्ट्रवाद आ गया. जहाँ कुछ नहीं पहुंचता, पहाड़ पर लोग पहाड़ का पानी पीते हैं, सरकार का पानी वहां तक नहीं पहुंचता. मातृभाषा में कोई स्कूल नहीं पहुंचता, अस्पताल में कोई डॉक्टर नहीं पहुंचता, बिजली नहीं पहुंचती, इंटरनेट नहीं पहुंचता, वहां कुछ भी नहीं पहुंचता। साहब, जहां कुछ नहीं पहुंचता वहां धर्म और गाय के नाम पर आदमी की हत्या के लिए इतना जहर कैसे पहुंचता है? देखिए, ये मैं महसूस करती हूँ कि एक लॉकडाउन तो हम लोगों को दिखाई पड़ रहा है, लेकिन बहुत पहले से एक लॉकडाउन देश में और समाज में और हमारे दिमाग के भीतर भी ये चल रहा था, और उसको हर तरीके से हम महसूस कर पा रहे थे। और इवन झारखंड में मैं देखती हूँ कि कैसे सारा झारखंड, उड़ीसा, छत्तीसगढ़ ये किस तरीके से प्रयोगशाला में बदल गया है, क्योंकि और ये जो बहुत सुदूर इलाकों में भी ये कट्टरता है या धर्म को लेके है, ये किस तरीके से ये पहुंच गया है, क्योंकि
जसिंता, शायद आप अपना वीडियो अगर बंद कर दे तो आवाज आपकी साफ आएगी।
अच्छा,
सिर्फ वीडियो बंद कर दीजिए।
ओके,
हाँ,
या अभी मेरी आवाज ठीक है?
नहीं,
थोड़ा सा डिस्टर्बेंस है। चलिए बोलिए, सॉरी।
तो वीडियो ऑन कर दीजिए उससे। हाँ, क्योंकि आई थिंक इट्स नॉट बिकॉज ऑफ दैट।
अच्छा, ओके। ऑन ही रखिए
तो
जसिंता।
मैं ये ठीक है, ठीक है। तो मैं ये महसूस कर रही थी कि ये देखिए बहुत झारखंड के सुदूर इलाकों में भी, जहाँ पे हर वर्ग के और हर कास्ट के लोग भी ऐसे मिलते रह रहे थे, ये कुछ सालों से ये मॉब लिंचिंग शुरू हो गया है। और इवन सिर्फ एक धर्म की बात नहीं है, दूसरे भी संगठित धर्म में और भी धर्म में मैं देखती हूँ कि जो भी यहाँ बोल रहा है या जो भी लिख रहा है, वो किसी भी कम्युनिटी का है, वो आदिवासी कम्युनिटी का भी क्यों ना हो, लोग उसको इस तरह शक की नजर से देखते हैं कि आपको कौन ऐसे सिखा रहा है या कौन आपको ऐसा पढ़ा रहा है। आपको अभी आदिवासी समाज से अगर कोई लिख रहा है तो आपको इतनी बुद्धि कहाँ से आ रही है? तो एक वर्ग डाउट करता है कि आपको दूसरे वर्ग वो आपको सिखा रहा है, वो आपको ट्रेन कर रहा है। दूसरा वर्ग हमेशा आप और इलाके में जाते हैं तो दूसरा हाँ, पिछले साल मैं गांव में थी और मैं देख रही थी कि कुछ बच्चों को शायद हम पढ़ा सकते हैं आदिवासी पर्सपेक्टिव से, या जो शिक्षा हमको कहाँ लेके जा रहा है। तो ये चीज हम जब बात करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे, तो ऐसे आधी रात में ही कुछ लोग ऐसे बुला लिए आपको, और वो सवाल वो पूछने लगे कि किसके एजेंडे पे आप काम करते हैं, मतलब आप किस धर्म के हैं, और आप हमारे एजेंडे से क्यों काम नहीं करते। तो ये सब मैं देखती हूँ कि इस तरह का सवाल जवाब जो पहले कभी भी हम लोगों से नहीं किया जाता था, हम अपने इलाके में भी जाके रह सकते थे, लिख सकते थे। मैं ये देखती हूँ इतना सारा अलग अलग तरीके से हर कोई ये कह रहा है कि ये तो हमारा इलाका है, ये हमारा इलाका है, यहाँ पे आप नहीं घुस सकते हैं, यहाँ पे आपको नहीं रह सकते हैं। अगर बहुत अंदर अपने गांव के जंगल वाले इलाके में वहां जाके भी रहते हैं तो उधर अलग से जो अभी नक्सली ग्रुप हैं, जो अलग से जिनका कुछ वो सिर्फ लेवी लेने के लिए है, वो वहां पे डिसाइड करते हैं कि आपको क्या पहनना है, आपको क्या खाना है, आपको किस तरीके से अपने बाल क्यों छोटा रखा हुआ है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये बहुत भीतर भी हम कहाँ जाएं और रहें, और बाहर थोड़ा सा आइए तो वहां पे पहले से ही ऐसे पुलिस बैठे रहती है, वो चेक करेगी कि आपने बैग में क्या रखा हुआ है। तो मैं ये देखती हूँ, मैं उनको बताती हूँ कि यहाँ तो मेरा घर है, तब वो कहते हैं अच्छा ठीक है। और फिर सिटी में भी आइए तो सिटी में अलग तरह की बेचैनी है। सुदूर इलाकों में भी जाते हैं तो हर जगह पे ये सारी चीजें कि आप किसके इशारे पे काम करते हैं, आपको कौन सिखा रहा है। तो मुझे लगता है कि और फिर अलग से एनजीओ है कि आप हमसे पूछ करके कुछ इलाकों में क्यों नहीं काम करते हैं, आप क्यों नहीं, 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 आप क्यो हमसे पूछ कर क्यों नहीं गई। तो मुझे ये लगता है कि पूरे झारखंड में मैं ये देखती हूँ कि जब हमको हर जगह पे इस तरीके से पूछ के जाना है, तो फिर हम मतलब हम है क्या, और हम किनके देश में, किनके राज्य में, किनके समाज में हम रह रहे हैं। तो ये सारी चीजें वो देखते हैं कि ये लॉकडाउन तो एक लॉकडाउन तो हमको ऐसे ऊपर से दिखाई दे रहा है कि समाज के भीतर में कैसे ये लॉकडाउन हो गया है, और दिमाग के भीतर भी ऐसे लॉकडाउन हो गया है। ये अभी कैसे खुलेगा, और कहाँ पर आप ऐसे बोलने के लिए और लिखने के लिए आप एक स्पेस आप पाएंगे। तो मुझे लगता है कि हर जगह पे हर एंगल से बहुत हमले हैं। बाहर जो बड़े लोग हैं, मैं तो बड़े एक्टिविस्ट को देखती हूँ कि वो उनको तो उठा के जेल में डाल दे रहे हैं, लेकिन जो जैसे हम जैसे स्वतंत्र पत्रकार भी हैं, उनके लिए भी इतना आसान नहीं है। और जो हम लोग भी जो कुछ लिख रहे हैं, तो हमेशा 4 लोग डरे रहते हैं कि ये शब्द मत लिखो, ऐसा मत लिखो। मतलब कि एक तरह का डर तो हर जगह पे है। और खासकर अभी तो कुछ आदिवासी वो बिल्कुल लिखना भी नहीं चाहते हैं। वो चीज चाहते हैं कि आप जैसी भी परिस्थिति है आप उसको एक्सेप्ट कीजिए, और उसी के अनुसार अपने को जितना बचा सकें आप वो बच करके रहिए। मैं देखती हूँ कि बहुत कम पत्रकार है। इवन मेरे छत्तीसगढ़ में एक मित्र हैं, अभी हाल में मैंने देखा कि उसके ऊपर भी इतनी धमकियां हैं, कब वो कहाँ गायब कर दिए जाएंगे ये पता भी नहीं चलेगा। तो मुझे लगता है कि इन इलाकों में तो लिखने के और भी हमारे लिए और स्पेस कम होता जा रहा है, जितना और लिखने वाले इतना डरते हैं कि आप जितना मतलब अपना सुरक्षा देखिए और अपने को बचा लीजिए और अपना आय का स्रोत देखिए और कैसे भी करके बच जाइए। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये सारी वो चीजें हैं। और कुछ सालों में जिस तरह की सत्ता, जिस तरह की शक्तियों के बीच हम हैं, वहां तो और भी कठिन है। वो फेसबुक में भी कुछ हम लिख नहीं सकते हैं। वो हमेशा मेरे मित्र कहते रहते हैं कि कुछ भी मत लिख दो, क्योंकि इतनी शक्तियां ताकतवर है, तुम कुछ कर नहीं पाओगी, और समाज भी हमारा कुछ नहीं कर सकेगा। कुछ हो भी जाएगा तो लोग भी नहीं खड़े होंगे। तो अपना देखो। ये इस तरीके का एक तो मानसिक रूप से भी एक तो लोगों का भी दबाव रहता है कि कितना आप बचा सके। क्योंकि जहाँ जहाँ पे मैं पिछले साल थी वो तो इतना सुदूर का इलाका है, वहां मुझे कैसे अपने रूम में ऐसे नेटवर्क मिल गया। मैंने बताया कि देखिए ये तो अपने ही लोग हैं, लेकिन इतना वो कट्टरता और इतना श्रेष्ठतावाद वो घुस जा रहा है कि आप अपने इलाके में भी अपने लोगों को भी आपको डिफाइन करना पड़ता है कि आप किसकी तरफ हैं, आपका धर्म क्या है, आप क्यों लिख रहे हैं, ये डिफाइन करना पड़ता है अपने लोगों के बीच। तो लोग अपने भी समाज में इतना डरे हुए हैं कि कौन किधर है, किसकी तरफ है, कोई भी नहीं जानता है। इतना कहीं कहीं से ऐसे नेटवर्क मिल गया। मैंने कहा कि दूसरा दिन सुबह ही जाना है, और ऐसा नहीं मैंने कहा कि दूसरे गांव हम जाके काम करेंगे, नहीं, ये पूरा इलाका हमारा है, तो हम यहाँ बहुत पहले से काम करते आए हैं, तो आपको इलाके में भी घुसने नहीं देंगे। मतलब इस तरह की चीजें हैं ये तो पूरा। तो मुझे लगता है कि और क्या बताऊं। हाँ, मतलब एक तरीके से लिखने को लेके और बोलने को लेके मतलब एक डर का और एक तरीके का मजबूरी या बेबसी ऐसा करके मैं देखती हूँ। मेरे जो कुछ मित्र भी लिख रहे हैं, तो जितना कॉम्प्रोमाइज करके बच के लिखें ऐसा करके वो डरते हैं। तो मुझे लगता है कि अगर ये बोलना और लिखना अगर नहीं करने के लिए आजादी अगर किसी समाज में, किसी देश में, किसी जगह पर वो खत्म हो जाता है, मुझे लगता है कि कितनी संकीर्णता की ओर हम जा रहे हैं। और कोई भी समाज और किसी भी देश का खत्म होने का यही निशानी है कि आप किसी को सुन नहीं सकते हैं। 4 एंगल से अगर कोई बता रहा है, कोई कश्मीर से कह रहा है, कोई छत्तीसगढ़ से कह रहा है, कोई कोई दिल्ली से कह रहा है, तो अगर आप उसको सुन नहीं सकते हैं, तो ये किसी भी समाज और किसी देश का पतन का सबसे ये वो चरम है, जहाँ पे संकीर्णता का वो इतना ब्लॉक है कि कोई देश, कोई समाज अपने भीतर ही इतना ब्लॉक होते जा रहा है कि फिर उसका रास्ता और कभी मिलेगा भी नहीं। मुझे तो लगता है कि ये जिस तरह की चीजें इतनी खराब हो रही है, जर्जर हो रही है, इन सब का इतना बारीक कारण है, और उसका खामियाजा सब कोई भुगतेंगे। तो मैं अपनी और छोटी कविता से अपनी बात खत्म करूंगी। जनहित में मेरा पालतू कुत्ता सिर्फ इसलिए मारा गया, मेरा पालतू कुत्ता सिर्फ इसलिए मारा गया क्योंकि खतरा देख वह भौंका था। मारने से पहले उन्होंने उसे घोषित किया पागल और मुझे नक्सल। जनहित में in public interest, my pet dog was murdered for the sole reason that it had barked on seeing a danger. It was declared rabid before being killed, and I a Naxal in public interest. जोहार, धन्यवाद।
शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत जसिंता। ये जो साधारणपन, डर एक साधारणपन हो गया है आम जिंदगी के साथ, डर और जो चुप्पी मची हुई है उसके बारे में आपने भी बताया, उसके पहले प्रदीप ने भी बताया, the normalization of fear and intimidation. There's a question from senior journalist Pamela Philippos for all the speakers. If you'd like to bring it into the remaining speakers, would like to bring it into their presentations, that when these individual journalists face intimidation, do they get support from the wider community of people, or is it a complete democratic lockdown and clampdown? I'll leave it to the other speakers to maybe bring in that some of their reflections on this question. Our next speaker is Andrew Sam, who's the founder of Simplicity, a popular hyperlocal portal based out of Coimbatore. And he's one amongst us who was actually arrested during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown, simply for turning the spotlight on the mismanagement of the entire lockdown in the city.
Hi, hi. Good evening, and hope everybody is staying safe in this COVID time. My name is Andrew Sam, and I run a portal called Simplicity, which focuses on bringing the city news at a greater depth to the folks of the city. So, regarding the question that was raised by the senior journalist, I think I can answer in first person as to what happened to me and how it went through. So, it would be of good interest to her. So, when I was when the case was like, when I was arrested, what happened was like, it wasn't a total democratic lockdown. We had a lot of people from the press. We had a lot of people from the press who had joined in the police station. They were there. But what had happened was like, there was a complete lockdown in terms of the information that was accused against us. So from the morning, like, when our journalists were there in the police station, pretty much the cases that were floating around in the air was like, one of our journalists had sent a sleazy message to a woman. Two, we have like, reported false information. To all of this, except for the actual case, which was supposed to have been put on us. Every other information that was put out. So that kept the journalists kind of like confused and not together when it came to the actual scenario. So they were basically trying to like, get the scenario out and ensure that the journalists are coming out, and but they didn't think as to why journalists have to be in a police station when it was supposed to be the editor or the publisher who is supposed to be talking to the police about if it is about an article, right? If it's about an article or if it's about some publication of news, then it is supposed to be the editor or the concerned person who's responsible for the publishing to be talking to the police. So there is a lot of misinformation that they actually float out to ensure that the community is kind of confused and bemused about what is happening. So it is not a straightforward attempt at most times. They try to come out with different kind of allegations to ensure that people are running around in all directions. So that is my answer for that. And after that, we had like a tremendous amount of support from friends who were known to people who are unknown to us completely, because we are in a city that is 500 kilometers south of Chennai. So even Chennai doesn't get the limelight generally when it comes to national issues. So you can imagine for someone, for me, to be getting the support from across the spectrum, like from Delhi to Mumbai, Kolkata. I mean, the whole country, all of the journalists. Siddharth started it. I think as soon as I got arrested, I think Siddharth tweeted about it. So it was all great when it came to the support that I received. And if it was not for the support, I don't think the saga, whatever happened, would have been any better. So, and I came out in 6 days simply because of the unrelenting support and unrelenting pressure that the entire community put on the particular case. And I'm always thankful for that. So that is the first thing that I wanted to get off. The other things is, like, I just wanted to remember the journalists who have served on the front line and who have actually passed away in Tamil Nadu. I think 5 people have died reporting through the COVID pandemic, and over 300 people have got infected, which most people will not know. And I'm sure it is the same with all the other states. So a moment of commiseration for them and the families who have strived through this pandemic to put out the news, may ensure that people get the information and not focus on the disinformation that is being spread out mostly from the top levels of the structure. So the other thing that I wanted to bring about is, like, throughout this the arrest of when I got arrested, and throughout the entire pandemic, the one thing that we have always faced is that the failure of the entire structure to actually give the proper information out to people is completely handled from top above. And a simple case, like we recently reported that a small area in Coimbatore had a cluster of 120 cases or above of COVID. And as soon as we got the ground sources to confirm the information, we actually reported it, and we had government officials coming up and saying, no, there are only 30 cases and not 120, as you said. As of today, I think that small area has reported over 500 or 600 cases since then. And that's the kind of official lies that they can actually come out and say to the media in terms of, like, bringing out the actual reporting. I guess, like, Meena has, like, touched upon most of the topics that I actually wanted to touch on regarding to the journalists who are being hounded in Tamil Nadu. So I'll leave at that. When I was in prison, I met a guy called Sudarshan. So I just wanted to narrate his experience when it came to, and he was on the similar case. I had a Epidemic Diseases Act slapped on me. But Sudarshan was arrested. He was from Vello, which is near Chennai. He was arrested, and he was there in a jail near Coimbatore, where I was there, for simply retweeting a meme that somebody else had shared about the chief minister. And when I went there, it was his 18th day, and he subsequently got bail on the 21st day. And probably he got his bail from the High Court and not from the court where his case was put up. And all of this was simply for retweeting a meme that he had retweeted by, which was against the Tamil Nadu CM. And he was put in a jail that was 500 kilometers away from his home. His parents had no clue as to, he didn't have any information as to what is happening. So because of the pandemic, nobody is allowed to see. So 21 days for a retweet of a meme that was not even, like, happening. I mean, not even an official report or something like that. These are cases that happen every day. I mean, we don't get to know it because they're not journalists. They're not people who are in the limelight. These people are there in every single jail in the recent times, and these are people that just have to brunt it out on their own. So this is the state of the free speech mechanism that is out here. So these are the kind of issues that we are facing here. And all the other issues that we are facing are typically, as Meena said, like from the both from the right wing and from the current people in the government. So they are subversion through noise. They put out a lot of noise. There will be things like, I know your name, so you must be one of those Christian Reichsberg missionaries who are trying to use your news medium to publish information and that sort of thing. So an identity harassment will always be there. And these are things that we need to fight out on a daily basis to ensure that the news is getting out. And the journalists who are out on the front line have to work with people who are trying to keep the information opaque, who are trying to keep the people not in the properly informed, and they also have to fight the virus while they're at it. So this is the state that we are working on. And thank you for inviting me into this panel discussion where we are commiserating the 3rd year anniversary of one of the bravest people among us. So thank you so much. And if there are any questions, I'd like to take it.
Thank you very much, Sam. I am putting my video off because my connection has again become very bad.
Okay.
Thank you so much. There may be some questions towards the end, and Sam, if you have some time just now,
sure,
we will just go ahead with the panel. Can you hear me, guys? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Kavita has requested, Siddharth, Kavita Lankesh has requested that she come in now before our fellow organizers come in, because she has another engagement later. So we all know Kavita Lankesh, and we know her, of course, as a filmmaker, a director, screenwriter, and a lyricist, and her work is very, very special in the Kannada film industry. But today she's here with us as close younger sister of Gauri, somebody who has very bravely carried Gauri's memory and voice forward. And we were very privileged last year, CJP, to publish Kavita's poems, which she dedicated to her sister Gauri, which she had written in the first 2 years of losing her. Kavita.
No. 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 No.
It's been as you know, it's the 3rd year of Gauri's assassination, and I've been kind of going blank in my head quite a bit. So let me see what I can speak. Couple things just haunt me every time. As you all know, when Gauri was alive, she was to hold an event every March 8th on my father's birthday. And that would be a very political, also a literary discussion. It was a huge event in Karnataka. People would come from all over Karnataka and sometimes throughout India. And nowadays, whenever I'm question, I think what in the stage usually they would say, what would Lankesh have said to the current scenario of the politics and everything? And now I keep thinking, what would Gauri have said to several things that's been happening in the country, which has been disastrous, which has been very, very disturbing. For something like CAA or unplanned lockdown and lakhs of migrants walking home, many things like this. And this time I forgot to add, I've also been labeled a little bit part-time activist these days, reluctant activist, because though I've always believed in what Gauri has stood for and ideals and yours and everything. I've shown my support and solidarity to issues like this through my films. But nowadays, of course, I've been called to many events in support of, say, for instance, LGBT community or CAA and things like that. And I have been going. And I was very proud recently. I went before the COVID. I went and sat on the very same steps of where Gauri would sit and protest in town hall. And it really was very touching to me. And I think it's important that I go out sometimes at least and show my support to people like you and Siddharth, who have been strong pillars with us. And I would like to actually read a poem, not mine, but one boy who's written Provara Kottur, and it's been translated by Pratibha Kumar. I'd just like to read that poem and end with a little bit of another writer. This was about Gauri, he's written. She was obsessed about bridges. The islanders did not like it. They broke them down daily, and she rebuilt them every day. With her bony hands, the bent back was as old as the bridge. She was forever drinking, smoking, questioning, planting saplings of wildflowers in the gun barrels. She was the voice, eyes, and arms of the tired souls. And she thrust her chest to catch the flying stones, singing songs of the struggle loud and clear. Someone was swearing the other day, "She's not a nice woman, sir. She burnt her wings, she spread her ashes for the faltering steps to walk on." Yes, sir, she was not a nice woman. In this same time, I was just reading articles which have come from many places about Gauri today, including Wire has carried a beautiful detailed article. In that, I would like to say that I've requested the government to, they've done with the formation of a society, and as you all know, about 19 people are inside. They are arrested in Gauri's case, and it's all connected now. Dabolkar, Pansari, and Kalburgi, and all that. So I hope the government formulates a speed court and hases the court proceedings so that all of these people will get justice. And in the same vein, I would like to add, I just happened to read this article today of Geeta Hariharan, and she's written beautifully, which goes with what I want to say. If we speak, Gauri will continue to speak through us. Our voices will come together as they should, strengthen our practice of democracy. This is why, once again, in September 2020, we should pledge to continue Gauri's fight against the haters of free speech and a plural India. We will continue to speak on her behalf and ours. They cannot silence us all. This is what I would like to say, and it's a beautiful ending piece. And if you all get a chance, just Google Geeta Hariharan. She's written a wonderful piece, and thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry I can't stay on. I've been listening to all of you speaking, and it's been, as usual, I say, when Gauri was around, she would tell me in-depth articles and talk to me about issues in depth, which no newspaper carry these days. As you know, most newspapers and most media has become pamphlets of the government, and there's nobody else standing and questioning the corruption or exploitation. And Gauri and P. Lankesh, my father, stood for that. And now for a handful of people like Teesta and Siddharth, all of you, are even Ranu Gauri is trying to do that. And I hope we continue to support and be in solidarity with all of you, and hope to keep Gauri's voice alive through all these kind of forums. Thank you so much.
So much, Kavita. And we understand that you have other commitments, but thank you so much for always being very patiently with us in every such commemoration. Personally, it must be so difficult and painful, but you're always there, and we are very, very grateful because you're much more than just Gauri's sister for us. And thank you so much. It has been very tough, friends, as we know, whether it's the Wire, whether it's Sabrang India, for any alternate portal to survive in these times. But all of us are trying, and we take one day at a time and see how it goes. The next speaker we have today is represents one of the four organizers of today's meeting, the Delhi Union of Journalists, Sujata Madhok. Sujata is not just a journalist and a feminist and a social activist and a trade unionist, but she is also the first woman president of the DUJ and is currently the General Secretary of the Delhi Union of Journalists. Thank you so much, Sujata, for being with us. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? I think
Yeah.
I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Thank you, Teesta, Sabrang, The Wire, for inviting us to be part of this very interesting discussion. And it's great that one could hear this evening people from all over, from Kashmir, from Manipur, from the heartland, all over, and hear their stories. And also from the south, Meena gave us an excellent understanding of how Tamil journalists have been systematically targeted. And in fact, I wish he would write about that. Perhaps Sabrang or The Wire can carry that. because I think all this needs documentation. We don't know enough, particularly in the north, about what is happening in many of these states and in many, in many of the regional languages. Now, let me say that during this COVID, because being from Delhi, I'm looking at it more nationally. And let me just be positive for a minute and say the kind of journalism we've had during this period has actually been very good. It's been excellent journalism. It's been wonderful. And reporters have just gone out into the field, braving all kinds of dangers and bringing us all these stories. Otherwise, the nation wouldn't know. Unfortunately, all these stories about testing, inadequacy of testing, inadequacy of treatment protocols, the lack of PPEs in hospitals, even the looting by hospitals, and so many other issues that cropped up during this period. Unfortunately, this is not something the government wants us to talk about. No, not the union government, not the state governments, and definitely not the local governments, including the civic authorities, and sometimes even the police, because there have been stories about, police high-handedness as well in enforcing containment zones or lockdowns or whatever. Now, in this scenario, what do journalists do? Young reporters really have done their best. They've gone out there, they've reported all this, but there has been repercussions, there have been all kinds of things that have happened, and you've heard this most recently from, I think, Sam Raja, just before me, about how he was actually arrested for this kind of reportage. And also about how he met somebody in jail who had merely retweeted, was it, a meme about the chief minister. Now, and that man was in jail for 21 years. 21 days. He wasn't a journalist. Now, the thing is, it's happening across the board. It's happening to us journalists, but it's happening to just ordinary people all the time, particularly during COVID, during this lockdown. I'm still trying to get over the fact that the UP police went down to Odisha a couple of days ago to a village there to pick up some guy who wrote something about the UP chief minister on, I think, Facebook. So it's not just us, it's the state of this nation that we really need to worry about now. Now, I'd like to mention the kinds of attacks that we've had. There aren't just physical attacks, but let's recall some of these physical attacks. And also remember that the disease itself has attacked people. So this is something we don't report. The media doesn't report how many of its own people have suffered during the lockdown. I've seen 1 or 2 reports about how, in a particular TV studio in Noida, one person was infected and so many others were infected, but the boss kept insisting that you have to come in. And ultimately, they had to shut down a couple of studios. Something similar was reported from Mumbai. But just, you just read about it sometimes on Twitter from other journalists, sometimes on Facebook, but you don't really get proper reportage on this because the media doesn't report on itself. There's a lot of self-censorship, there always has been. And while we journalists may not have so much camaraderie among us, believe me, the employers have it all. They are very well networked and they know their interests very well, and they don't want to report anything inconvenient to them, which is why you don't hear about some of these things. Now, of course, when people get COVID, and very recently I heard from some of our friends in Telangana, Andhra, that as many as 16 journalists had died during this time of COVID. And I was quite shocked at that figure, but I do not have the details, unfortunately, yet. Now, in these, when all of this happens, in Delhi we had one suicide. At least I think it was a suicide of a person who was, from a journalist from Dainik Bhaskar who jumped out of a window in the All India Medical Institute. Now, in these situations, the questions of risk insurance, whether, how much risk newspapers and television channels should be, asking their staff to take on, whether there's any form of protective equipment, whether there is any risk insurance, and whether there's any form of compensation. Those questions arise, and those questions again are never answered. No media group is transparent about the kind of compensation or the kind of insurance that they give to people. And I know that in many states, it's the demands go to the state governments. Okay, help us. Here is a widow left behind. Give her something. And I know there's one national fund which has fairly recently been set up in the Ministry of INB. But how much it is and what is the quantum, I don't know. So that's about the risk that we as a community face. The other kinds of risks, of course, we've just heard so much about the filing of FIRs, the arresting of journalists. And we know that this lockdown has been so convenient. The reasons haven't just been the lockdown itself. The reasons have been others as well. Conveniently pick up people because go question them, interrogate them, whatever you wish, because you know that protest during the lockdown will be limited. And it can be somebody, just a journalist like Prashant Kanodia, who the second time around has been picked up by UP police, I think for some allegedly defamatory tweets. Now, I'm not commenting on the kind of tweet, but this happens, that they will come and arrest you for a tweet. And then, of course, Siddharth, I don't know if he wants to talk about his case, but, in April, he was asked to appear before the police in UP at very short notice during a lockdown when no transport was available and hotels weren't open, right? Similarly, Vinod Dua was asked to report to the police in Himachal Pradesh, go from Delhi to Himachal. These cases are still ongoing because the courts may provide some level of protection, but it's partial in verification. Then you have the case of the scroll journalist, Supriya Sharma, who reported on hunger in the PM's constituency during the lockdown. As you know, and I think also the scroll editor has been brought into that case. Again, that case goes on, and again, the courts have intervened to help in some way. But the problems continue. The other thing that happened was that very recently, was the caravan journalists who went to report on the riot areas in Delhi, and 3 of them were attacked by a mob, including apparently a right-wing politician. And with difficulty, they managed to escape. Somehow they had some help from the police. At least they managed to get to the police station, but they were completely traumatized. And this included a young woman who didn't even want her name put out, who was obviously very traumatized. I also want to mention that when these things happen, now in the Caravan is an exception because Caravan brought it out and Caravan stood by those journalists and will try to fight those cases, file FIR against these people, get some kind of punishment. But I want to remind you that during the riots, and you see, our memory is short, so we forget, but lots and lots of journalists faced mob attacks in Delhi. And I'll just mention some names. Akash
a little bit quickly. Sorry, Sujata.
No, Akash
Yeah,
JNK
yeah.
24/7 who had a gunshot injury. Arvind Gunasekara who lost teeth. This is NDTV. Saurabh Shukla, Mariam Alvi, Sushil Rathi, Kunjun Sharma of News 18, Shiv Narayan Purohit of Indian Express, Parveena Purkaistha, Akshay Kumar Dongre, and Tanushree Pandey of Aaj Tak. Now, in all these cases, there are no cases. Nothing happens. Impunity, right? I don't think FIRs are filed. Nothing happens now. So this culture of impunity, when you attack journalists, this has to be fought, because it isn't just the state; it's also the mobs, it's also politicians. We have to fight that impunity. We have to find ways to do it. Of course, we also know about all the other kinds of attacks, the virtual attacks, the trolling, the doxing of women journalists. We also know that there are legal attacks in the form of defamation suits. And Paranjoy has done a lot of, has brought out a whole book on the kind of thing that happens. Of course, that is before the COVID. And we know that even the media itself, in some ways, faces attacks, indirect attacks from state governments, because there is always the duties on newsprint, and there is the withdrawal of advertising if you don't toe the line. So those are other issues that come up. But the worst attacks that we as a community have faced have been attacks on our own financial stability, our own ability to continue in journalism because of the huge pay cuts, the compulsory leaves, the illegal retrenchments. Now, we as a union, along with the BUJ and the NAJ, have tried to challenge this in the Supreme Court. We are still waiting to be heard, still waiting for some kind of resolution. Let us see. However, we know that about 1,000 journalists have lost their jobs during this lockdown. That's the cruelest cut of all. Lastly, I want to say that we do need to find ways out of this situation. And we in BUJ have tried for years. We're about 60 years old as a union. And say our president, S.K. Pandey, spent much of his life, and so have many other people, just trying to get this union support, keep it going, keep these struggles ongoing. It's not easy. Younger journalists have to carry on this battle. They have to unionize, they have to collectivize, they have to get together. And also, we do need to build alliances with people like you. We need to build alliances, particularly with the legal fraternity, since we're so much under attack, and we need help from civil society activists, because this is not our struggle alone, it is the struggle of this entire nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sujata. I keep my video off. The next speaker is a colleague and independent journalist, Geeta Seshu, based in Mumbai, engaged in reporting and analyzing media issues, particularly freedom of expression, gender, caste, media ethics, and working on the condition of journalists. Not only is she an office bearer of the Brihan Mumbai Union of Journalists, but she is also co-founder of the Free Speech Collective. Geeta.
Thank you, Teesta. Thank you for organizing this with The Wire. Siddharth Vardarajan and The Wire has been a very, very important space for many of the issues that we've discussed today and which we are going to also be speaking of. So, a space that is really actually very, very small today. Over the years, we've documented a lot of the attacks on free speech. And a number of these attacks have been by non-state actors, vigilante groups. They've been by political parties, fringe groups that are now mainstream, very unfortunately. And we've looked at the fact that there has been such terrible impunity in terms of getting any kind of justice for them. I mean, Teesta, you've done this excellent report on the status of the case of the assailants of Gauri Lankesh. And till today, there is absolutely no progress really in the case. There was some kind of progress for a while, but then it's reached a kind of standstill. That seems to be the situation with almost all other instances too. The journalists, we have about 30 killings of journalists since 2010, which I have looked at. And we have had only 3 convictions. Between 2014 to 2019, along with Urvashi Sarkar, I had documented the progress of investigation in about 98 serious cases, and there hasn't been a single conviction. This is not really very surprising if you look at what happened with the caravan journalists just last month. There has been no FIR registered, despite the fact that they have given detailed complaints. So what we are seeing is this, impunity that that other speakers have also all referred to. It's absurd in a way that we have the Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Prakash Javadekar, who took such objection to the Reporters Without Borders, the ranking that they came out with, and said that the ranking for India and press freedom in India especially has fallen by 2 places, and it's now 142 in 2020. And Javadekar took a lot of objection to this. It's astounding in a way, because here is a minister who ought to have said, let's look at the data, let's look at the hard facts, which we have. We have all the data, we have all the hard facts. These are verified data. And yet we don't have the government waking up to any kind of the failure of mechanisms to just provide this kind of justice. And why does this happen? The discussion for today is about free speech in times of COVID. And if we look at the way in which the government has tried to manage this narrative from day one, it's shocking that a government will call editors and owners of news media and ask them to provide a kind of positive narrative, positive stories on this the lockdown, just a few hours before they announced the lockdown. Now, what the government has tried to do with these kind of measures, not just the invitation to all these editors and owners, but also a status report that they filed before the Supreme Court in a case which was looking at migrant workers, where the government has actually suggested pre-censorship of news and has talked about pre-verification or news that can only be official. So the message that comes is very, very clear, and it comes from the top. And this message is that any kind of news that is somewhat critical, that is that questions or provides a different narrative, as Andrew had already told us, is something the government is going to crack down on. And administrations across the board have done this. So we have notifications from various state governments that actually say that they will use the Disaster Management Act to crack down on any kind of news which they say may create panic or affect public order, public safety. Now, all of this has resulted in a spate of FIRs against journalists. Journalists have been arrested, as we have the testimony already from Andrew here, and we have a number of other testimonies from journalists. We have Siddharth, the case against Siddharth, and against several other journalists. We have 2 journalists who are in jail. We have Prashant Kanodia, who his bail was rejected just a couple of days ago. He's been in jail. And of course, Gauhar has already talked about Asif Sultan, who has been in jail for the last 2 years and 5 days, to the date. So free speech is definitely under attack. But what we are seeing is the fact, I mean, what we are actually very, very disturbed about is that in these last 5 months, apart from the fact that free speech has been under attack in a very, very systematic way across these years, from 2010, perhaps, since I've been documenting this, to the last few years from 2014, which has intensified really. And in these last 5 months, the struggle has also been to preserve and to protect ourselves from the attack from within. And that is something that I'd like to spend a little time looking at, because it's been an attack from within in two ways. One, of course, is the kind of self-censorship that other speakers have talked about. We've also had a very, very partisan media that has adopted, that has taken upon itself the mantle of speaking for the nation, and has used the most vituperative and inflammatory kind of programming to actually attack any kind of journalism or journalistic principles that we would all uphold. Now, there is this partisan media, and there is also the weakening of journalists and the rights of journalists from media houses. And that's actually, what Sujata also referred to, because we've had over 1,000 journalists who have lost jobs, and media owners have been completely unethical in the manner in which they have got rid of scores of journalists with bare and leave alone the intimation with even the kind of rights that they are entitled to under the law. Sujata spoke about the case that that the Briha Mumbai Union of Journalists, the DUJ and the NAJ had filed before the Supreme Court. The case is still pending, and in the last hearing, we've had the Supreme Court agreeing to tag this petition along with a whole lot of other petitions. And the reason why I'm speaking of this also is that for us to expect any kind of relief from the courts, speedy relief from the courts, whether it is about the protection for working journalists and their conditions of service, or whether it is for free speech related issues, like we talked about the impunity already possible in a session today. It's a very, very long and very painful struggle, and often a very lonely battle to secure any kind of relief or any kind of justice. Often families of journalists, I mean, we've talked to a number of people who, not just journalists, but even citizens who've had to fight for their free speech, to protect their free speech. It's an extremely lonely battle, and inevitably after the first phase of publicity to those cases, they end up having to fight these cases alone. So what I really would like to speak of is two things really. What I'd like to flag at this point. One is that.
Sorry, Geeta, can you just sort of
I will wind up, because I don't want to go into too much of detail. But what I'd really like to flag are two things. One is that what we realized in the BUJ and in our interactions with working journalists is that many of them are absolutely unaware of their rights. And this is quite a shocking situation, because there really needs to be much greater awareness of your rights, even as the government is whittling it down and erasing it through labor codes and other such mechanisms which they're going to bring in. So these very hard-fought rights are going to be lost for us. The battle to protect free speech, of course, is a much, much bigger one, and it really requires immense resources, financial, emotional resources. It requires a very strong network of journalists, of lawyers, civil society activists. Definitely it requires a much bigger movement, and I hope today is the beginning of that. I'd like to end with a tribute really to the memory of Gauri, and I'd like to share something that a lawyer friend of hers had told me. He said that every time Gauri had a case against her, whether it was a defamation case or anything else, she used to go for these hearings, but she turned every hearing into an opportunity to speak even more than she was being than was being taken away from her. And at one point, she also told these lawyers, she said, "You deal with the law and I'll deal with the journalism." And I can just hear her say that 3 years down the line and say that we all need to just do that. We need to have lawyers who help us. We need to have civil society. And we definitely need to continue with the journalism that we would like to see, and also the free speech that we would like to uphold. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Geeta. Thank you so much, as always, for being there. Siddharth, the wire for us, and you as an individual journalist have always been a comrade in arms, and it's a privilege to have this panel together with the wire and the DUJ and the BUJ. And I also hope, like Geeta said, that this is the beginning and we have many more such, and we continue to have more such. Siddharth, as we all know probably, because he's one of our towering alternate journalism, who's made the Wire a huge success actually with his colleagues. He's not just a founding editor at the Wire, he was earlier editor of the Hindu, and he is one of the 7 journalists named by none less than Jay Shah, Home Minister Amit Shah's son, in a defamation case for publishing a story critical of his business transactions. That's not the only thing that the Wire has done. As Gauhar Saab was telling us before we formally began, the Wire is read much more than any other news portal in the Valley and in Kashmir because of its high credibility of reporting. The UP government has also lodged an FIR against Siddharth Varadarajan for the portal's coverage of Chief Minister Adityanath's presence at a religious event in Ayodhya on the occasion of Ram Navami, when a national lockdown was in force in March this year. Siddharth, before I formally invite you, I want to just give you also 2 questions that have come specially for you and the Wire, that I see platforms like the Wire seeking donations, and is it very fragile and difficult to run an independent media portal when journalism seeks to be independent? That's one question. And the other question also possibly you could take, I feel, is that there's an example given by one of our participants today that in the West, the CNN and BBC work actively to highlight articles written in print, whether it's the electronic digital media or in the newspapers. Example, a recent article in The Atlantic on Trump's views on the military. Why do channels such as the NDTV not enhance their reporting with such collaborations? Are there legal issues or is this ego? Thank you, Siddharth, for doing this together with us. Siddharth Varadarajan.
Yeah, I'll speak briefly because I think the purpose behind having today's event has broadly been, I think, covered marvelously by all of the speakers. They've gone into the precise ways in which media is under pressure in times of COVID, free speech is under pressure. And Teesta and I, when we were discussing, planning the panel, were very keen that we have diverse, voices from every part of India, because often we forget sitting in Delhi or Bombay that the kind of pressure that the media comes under in places like Kashmir or Tamil Nadu or the Northeast, Manipur, can be much more severe than what we face. And very often journalists are left to fend for themselves. So it was very important for us to have colleagues from there. And I think that they have painted a disturbing picture, a dark picture, but I think also an inspiring one, because they continue to do their work. They are undeterred, and they are standing their ground. And that's a very great inspiration for us. And we were also very keen to have representatives of the journalist unions, because quite frankly, an underlying theme of our discussion today has been the need for solidarity. The fact that, we cannot fight this battle against the attempts to suppress free speech and press freedom unless we stand by each other, and unless we essentially make those links and, forget about our individual organizational identities and basically stand for the importance of free press. And I think that the role of unions here is absolutely crucial because they are in many ways a collective voice, and they also highlight what's an issue which has come to the fore in the pandemic, but which is an abiding problem, which is the rather precarious financial, economic situation, employment situation of many journalists, and how employers have made use of the crisis triggered by COVID-19 and the lockdown and the general slowdown to act very, very unfairly against journalists who they had employed. So I think these are all of these factors, and against the context of, or rather in the context of Gauri's anniversary and the kind of person that she was and what she stood for and the kind of threats that she faced, I think that we've really underlined through a whole bunch of examples the kind of threats that we face and how we need to fight them. The one point I want to underline is that what the pandemic has done is that it has taken all the worst features of the Indian state and the behavior of governments at the center and at the state level, and magnified them, made them much worse. So earlier too, governments were intolerant of the media. Earlier too, governments were quite happy to play communal politics. Earlier too, governments were quite happy to centralize the whole process of information dissemination. Earlier too, governments were quite happy to curtail the ability of the opposition to ask questions. And we see that all of these elements, which have regrettably become part and parcel of the kind of democracy we are, have gotten accentuated. All these problems are accentuated. And this tells us that the fight for media freedom that all of us have to wage is part of the battle to preserve and to hold on to the gains of Indian democracy. I think Pradeep mentioned the pressure that people in academia face, the self-censorship. Meena has spoken about writers. The kind of the way in which legal threats are used, FIRs are filed. This has become the new fashion, regrettably, where attempts are made to tie down journalists, tie down academics in all kinds of false and frivolous cases. These are cases which, when they eventually go to court, will not stand up at all. But then you spend years, and these cases never really go away. I recently got information from Madras High Court that they had finally dismissed a criminal defamation case that had been launched against me when I was editor of the Hindu back in 2013. So 7 years later, after the person who initiated those proceedings, Jayalalitha, she died a year ago, but despite that, the proceedings carried on. And it's taken 7 years for the High Court to finally throw that case out. And so this is really how they attempt to shackle the media. And I don't want to mince my words here. I think these pressures are going to mount. The economic crisis and the inability of the government to deal with them and to come up with credible solutions is only going to strengthen their desire to clamp down. And the media is the obvious target. What Sujata said is very true, that despite all the pressures, we have tried to do the best we can. And I salute the bravery of colleagues who have covered the lockdown, covered the distressful forced migration of workers across the country, who have covered the plight of frontline health workers and so on. And I think that this is a very difficult job that colleagues have done, and I'm confident that we will carry on doing them. But the risks are obviously going to increase. Now, the two questions that were put are important questions. The first is about, I don't want to talk too much about the Wire, and this is not so much about us, but I think independent media, Sabrang is part of that, Wire is part of that. There are lots of other examples. What Pradeep Hanjumam is doing in Manipur, and the examples across Northeast and South. we rely crucially on the financial support of readers. And in one way or the other, readers need to find ways to support these initiatives, because if you don't do it, it'll be very hard to sustain these ventures. So I think that ultimately, and I'm happy that we are managing Teesta. Sabrang has grown from strength to strength. Others too are flourishing and doing well, but it needs continuous support. On the second question of the comparison between the US and India, I would say NDTV actually is one of the better channels. Often, if we look at, say, Vasu's, Srinivasan Jain's programs, or Ravish, he often picks up. In fact, very often the Wire's articles or stories have been picked up, or Caravan, or things that others have reported. Pieces are picked up and become the topic of discussion. So I think NDTV is one of those channels that actually does do what the questioner was asking. But regrettably, other channels don't do that. And in fact, other channels actually, regrettably, have become sort of instruments to try to discredit independent media. So a new definition of journalism has emerged where editors and publishers and TV channel proprietors believe that supporting the government come what may and running down everybody who's critical, that this is what journalism is all about. And I think viewers and readers need to vote with their remote controls and vote with their eyeballs to tell media houses that that's not what we want. That vibrant democracy needs an independent, vibrant media that doesn't flinch from asking questions. And so I would say that we need to have a lot more solidarity between. But I think to my mind, that's not a major issue right now. I think the bigger problem is that you have, unlike, say, in the emergency where Mrs. Gandhi, the public knew that the media is being censored, and it was a declared emergency. And as we ran a piece by the noted Kannada writer Devanura Mahadeva, where he said Indira Gandhi's emergency was face to face. This is an emergency behind a mask. So the difficulty that the public at large faces in accepting the reality, this is the challenge that we face, and it becomes easier for governments to clamp down on freedom of expression when the public at large believes that, well, there's no problem. So we need to double down on the work we do. We need to, even though it's going to get more and more difficult to do independent journalism, we have to do that. We have no option. At least I believe the way Zoom works is that there is a pretty hard, the end point of 8 o'clock. So we can go on a bit more. Okay. So, but anyway, that's broadly what I wanted to say. That I think that before we went live, we were discussing Prashant Bhushan. There's lots of similarities between the attempt to silence him and the attempt to silence the media. But what's important, and what Prashant demonstrated, was that if you stand your ground, even when you face, and what could be a more powerful sort of forum that is arraigned against you than the Supreme Court of India, right? A court against which you go. And Prashant Bhushan stood his ground, and even when the court was beseeching him to apologize, he said, "I'm not going to apologize." And finally, the moral victory was that of Prashant's. And I think that the court, those who tried to silence him have not succeeded. And it will be, I think, many times, I think judges and courts and governments are going to think many times over before they try to, file a contempt of court case against Prashant, or hopefully others like him who speak frankly and honestly about the situation that's happening. So I think that's really what I wanted to say. And Kavita, highlighted the work that how she has in a way retooled her work, and all of us are adjusting to this new situation where there are pressures, and you have to come up with new ways of communicating. But at the end of the day, the courage that Gauri showed is the courage that we have to embrace. This is the courage. This is what we have to do. And in the face of these kinds of pressures, whether they be in Kashmir or in Manipur or any other part, we need to raise our voices, speak as one, and ensure that the freedom of the press survives, because if that doesn't happen, then democracy in India will be imperiled. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. And back to you, Teesta.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. Really, thank you very, very much. And thank you all of you and all the panel of speakers, especially for today. There's one question which I think I'll just take the liberty of clarifying. The question is that when the media policy came, was in Kashmir, why did everybody keep quiet about it? And I just want to point out that I remember the stories in the Wire. I remember the stories in many independent portals, including Sabrang. But the problem is that, yeah, many sections of the media did not discuss it as intrepidly as maybe it should have been discussed. I think, Siddharth, I don't think solidarity is a problem, you're right, but maybe discussions like these need to be more frequent, need to be more, this thing, because we would have liked so much to have somebody from Uttar Pradesh today, because the situation there is quite grim. Then you go to Madhya Pradesh and you find that it's also bad there. So I think maybe we can think of a way of continuing some of these discussions every couple of months, so that we can bring to the attention of people what is happening to our colleagues in different parts of the country. Yeah, it's certainly a state of undeclared emergency, just like the piece you referred to. The phrase that is being used more and more about this regime is that we are living in a state of undeclared emergency, which makes it more difficult to explain, more difficult to comprehend. And when the Solicitor General of the country calls journalists vultures in the court, simply because they are actually reporting on the mass migration, which is probably worse or almost as bad as we saw during partition, of the migrant worker, and the migrant worker has become visibilized for the first time, then we see a real deterioration and a brazenness of the state. I also want to put in 2 lines, Siddharth, and my fellow panelists, about the absolutely, Geeta referred to this, that how we are facing a division from within. We are facing an attack from within. And Siddharth referred to it when he talked about those channels that are actually trying to defame sane, rational, and independent journalism. And I want to refer particularly to the Tablighi Jamaat campaign, which is nothing short of a journalism as genocide attempt in my view, because the kind of targeting that took place by not just 1, but 5 or 6 or 8 channels, particularly the Hindi channels, actually resulted in gross ostracization of the Muslim community on the ground in villages and small towns in Uttar Pradesh. So I think we really are looking at a very, very dangerous situation, but we have no choice. We have to somehow think of ways and means to continue to do the work that we have set out to do. And there could be no better time and date that we rededicate ourselves to this work than the 5th of September this year, when Gauri Lankesh was taken from us. And yet she remains with us still. I said in a slightly goofy but emotional post 3 days back that I believe she's somewhere there still watching and smiling and worrying about us, because I can't really believe that Gauri is not amongst us anymore. She continues to inspire young journalists, young activists in a way that very, very few people have been able to do. And I think it's because she kind of spanned so many different areas, so many different missions she took up. She was also peace builder. She was also brokering a dialogue between those who are called extremists and the government. I mean, she did many, many things in her work, and she did it courageously with that smile on her face and grace and conviction in her stride. I don't have really much more to say. The other questions have been more in the nature of comments, saluting independent journalists, requesting more such panels and discussions, and also with the concern and worry that how are we going to combat authoritarianism and fascism. I don't think all of us have the answers, all of them, but I think maybe we should keep still trying to find those answers through our work. I'd like to salute all our panelists, Meena, Gauhar, Pradeep, Sam Raja Andrew, Jacinta, Sujata, Geeta, and of course, Siddharth. Kavita, we miss you because you're not here at the end with us, but Kavita Lankesh and her daughter Isha Lankesh, who was a real favorite of Gauri's and has started writing really beautifully. But today has just decided not to be there and not to speak to any of us, which is absolutely her right. And her mother, Indira, we just want to say thank you so much for staying with us and being with us through this very painful journey. Thank you very, very much, friends.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.